If you guys haven't already heard, Hi-Rez aka Titanforge has released some big news for the upcoming Season 6 SMITE Pro League, and there's been a ton of backlash on its release. So in today's video, we're going to talk about these changes, what they could mean, and how the current Pro League players are taking them. Let's start off with the changes themselves. For the upcoming Season 6 of SMITE, Titanforge has revealed that all SMITE Pro League games will be played on LAN at Hirez Studios in Alpharetta, Georgia. Although this is great for competition and live stream production, it's also a pretty major inconvenience for most SPL players, especially those that are based in Europe. The Pro League will also be reduced from a total of 12 teams to 10 teams with no region lock, which means that players from any part of the world can play on the same team together, creating the opportunity for some mixed NA and EU teams, as well as a chance for any stars from smaller regions to find a spot on a pro team. And finally, win-loss records will now last for the entire season. There won't be multiple splits divided by season, but instead one continuous Pro League season, akin to the year-long seasons you'd find in typical pro sports. So those are the official changes listed in the original reveal. Let's go ahead and dive into what these changes will mean and also provide some additional insight that has been released since. Starting with the pros and cons of only playing on LAN, there's been a lot of backlash and outrage against this change by many of the players, which is understandable considering this means for a lot of travel time for anyone not near Titanforge Studios in Alpharetta, Georgia. Many EU pros are talking about leaving the SMITE professional scene because they'd be traveling throughout the entire pro season unless they wanted to move to North America. Todd Harris, the COO of Hi-Rez and president of Skillshot, has since provided some clarifying information on this subject. First off, Skillshot will pay all travel fees for any pro players who don't live in the nearby area. That means both hotel fees and plane tickets, which would otherwise be massive expenses for these players. For anyone unfamiliar with Skillshot, Skillshot is the new subsidiary of Hirez Studios, launched back in May of 2018. Skillshot is currently dedicated to the production and management of all Hi-Rez eSports, including SMITE, Paladins, and Realm Royale. Although Skillshot currently handles only Hi-Rez events, it appears that they may expand towards other games and events in the near future. Back onto the topic of travel, Todd Harris has also announced that no team will travel more than 12 times during the regular season of the SMITE Pro League. Adding in a tournament here and there, we can assume that any out-of-region players should expect to travel about 15 times throughout the entire 52 weeks of SMITE Season 6. However, that doesn't quite add up with their original announcement, which reveals 5 weeks of preseason play, 13 weeks of play in the first half of the season, a mid-season tournament, and then 13 weeks of play in the second half of the season. With those 31 combined total weeks of LAN, I think it's safe to assume that Titanforge is planning to have players play multiple weeks worth of games, which would then be played on stream week by week. This would allow for the 31 total weeks of the SPL season while still allowing players to travel only 12 times throughout the 31 weeks. But it is worth noting this would mean traveling 12 times within around a 31-week period, meaning players should expect to travel once every 2 to 3 weeks during the regular season, but then only travel a couple of times to events during the other 21 weeks of the year. Now, obviously traveling will have a big impact on players' personal lives, such as their significant others or their schooling. And with those big impacts due to travel time, I would expect for at least a few teams settling down in the Alpharetta area. So let's talk about how this could impact the players, the NA scene, and the EU scene. First of all, some players don't want to travel and they don't want to move close enough to commute to LANs. Right now, we can only speculate how many players will drop out of professional SMITE for this reason, but it's safe to assume that at least a few players will leave the competitive scene over this huge increase in commitment. Second of all, if multiple EU teams decide that moving would be a better decision than traveling, this could create some serious division in the EU professional scene. Since any teams that move to NA would want to play on NA servers whenever they're playing online, this would create some serious rift between any EU players who relocated when playing with their teammates overseas. The ping difference across the entire Atlantic Ocean is pretty huge, and NA players playing on EU servers or EU players playing on NA servers should expect around 150 ping, which would make it much more difficult to play at a pro level. So EU teams should expect to either remain entirely in EU and travel to LANs or relocate all members of the team to the Alpharetta, Georgia area in North America. Getting all 5 players to agree on the decision to move or stay could be really difficult, and I suspect we'll see some serious roster changes for the current EU teams because of that decision as well. Now, what if in a theoretical world, every single EU team moved to NA for these changes? This could also cause some serious damage to the European SMITE scene as a whole because those players would all transition over to North American servers instead of the European servers they previously played on. I would expect that losing the majority of top-level European ranked players could be a huge hit to the future of the European scene and be seriously discouraging to any promising EU minor league players that are currently working their way up. If the EU minor league players don't have professional players to regularly play against online, it could lead to a serious division in skill between future North American and European players. Now let's look at this from the North American side. Although traveling will generally be easier for North American players since they don't have to travel overseas, it'll still be a major issue for most of the current NA scene since the United States is huge and most pros will still need to either fly or move to Alpharetta in order to get to LAN. A big chunk of North American players are still in high school, meaning that even with a pro salary, they still can't expect to move away from their parents out on their own. And I don't think too many families are going to relocate themselves just so their child can play professional esports. So for the vast majority of pro players under 18, they'll need to travel to LANs, which could hinder their ability to find or stay on a team since some teams may be relocating all of their players to the Alpharetta area. And for pro players currently in college, they have to weigh the decision of staying at their current university and traveling to LANs or dropping their schooling entirely to move and pursue SMITE eSports. Obviously, with all of this said, there are some huge potential downsides to the Season 6 changes. Some pro players will definitely leave the scene, and it's difficult to say just how many. But even though many people fear the loss of that pro talent, I'm still holding on to hope with these changes. These changes represent Titanforge investing even deeper into the pro scene than they already did in Season 5. There's a meme right now that people seem to be buying into that SMITE is dying. The viewing numbers were down on Worlds, and for many people that confirms it. However, let's look at the bigger picture. The vast majority of professional SMITE has moved to Mixer, a much smaller platform than Twitch, which naturally leads to smaller viewer counts than Twitch. Although this does damage the interest of players watching the professional scene, it doesn't accurately represent the amount of players playing SMITE. I think the growth of my channel alone can show you guys that SMITE is still attracting lots of new players, and I firmly believe that SMITE is growing. I started this channel back at the beginning of Season 4, and it's grown to the size in less than 2 years. While most of the other big SMITE channels started back in Season 1 or earlier, my channel is still growing faster than ever, and I frequently get comments from people new to the game, eager to learn, who have only started playing within the past few seasons. And while I think this growth is a great sign for me as a content creator, I also think it's a great sign for the future of SMITE. And with these changes, Titanforge is looking at other games much bigger than SMITE, seeing how much they invest in their competitive scene and saying, well, why can't we? In the short term, yes, these Season 6 changes will be absolutely chaos for the competitive scene, and we may lose a big chunk of the current pro player base. But in the long run, Titanforge is looking to promote SMITE as the unique game that it is, and the unique angle it provides to professional esports. SMITE is currently a game with 0 close competitors. It plays very differently from MOBAs such as League and Dota, and with both Paragon and Gigantic recently shutting down, there are no other third-person MOBAs like it. Imagine the hype of every single professional game being played on a LAN environment, where we can see player cams, watch them on the stage, listen in on their comms, and get a better feel for their personalities. The competition that will emerge from organizations forming their own team houses, where their players can build tighter bonds and better teamwork, leading to an even stronger competitive scene. Many players are speculating that SMITE is trying to act bigger than it is by taking its pro league to LAN, and I think that's true. But by acting bigger than it is, SMITE is also creating more room to grow to be as big as it wants to be, attracting more organizations and more players in the process. As scary as these changes may seem to SMITE esports, imagine how well they could pay off. Before I wrap up this video, I want to add on a couple final bits of information. The current minimum pro salary for a pro SMITE player is $30,000 a year. Salaries are paid by the organizations, not by Titanforge. According to Todd Harris, the average pay is around $40,000. The minimum salary that goes at $30,000 is still transitioning into Season 6. However, the SMITE Minor League is getting a massive increase in funding, where players will receive a minimum salary of $10,000 a year. And with the Minor League still being played online, this provides a legitimate platform for players interested in going pro, and for pro players who are willing to treat SMITE as a part-time job in order to keep playing online. With so many EU players mentioning the possibility of leaving professional SMITE, I've noticed a lot of talk about how there should be an EU studio for LANs. I think it's worth addressing the fact that this would mostly just complicate the transition to LAN. Even if Titanforge kept both regions intact, the EU players would still need to travel to their LAN, and many players would still need to fly to each EU LAN, making an EU studio only slightly more convenient for those players while keeping the scene split in half. The goal with this transition to LAN is to create a larger and more competitive pro league throughout the regular season and not just at the tournaments by combining both the North American and European leagues all in one LAN environment. Anyways, with all of this stuff said, that does it for the video, guys. These are some changes that have the potential to destroy the SMITE competitive scene, but I'm still hopeful that the damage will only be short-term and that we'll actually see some huge growth to competition. Other games like Overwatch and Counter-Strike have developed incredible competitive scenes with huge money involved, and I'm very excited to see Titanforge reaching for the stars, trying to see if they can do the same. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.
I've been seeking for the glory. Say my name. And I've been trying to write my own story in the search for fame. I'm sitting here in this empty room, walls keep tumbling down.